It's a sizable hall, and I'll do my best to project, but if you're not hearing me, please just like maybe make a gesture to your ear, and I'll be like, oh dang, I gotta lift it up because I have an unfortunate tendency to emphasize things by speaking quietly, which doesn't make any sense, but for some reason it just happens. So feel free to just let me know because we want everyone to be included here. I'm so grateful to be here. I came here and gave a talk about 4 or 5 years ago on a similar road trip. I've been driving across the country giving talks at various Buddhist practice centers, and really feel the love and care that has been put into this place as a physical environment and the community of people who are here. So just coming in and seeing all that has been done with the building to make it more beautiful and more accessible, it matters. So, I come from the Zen tradition where the way we care for our environment is a big part of our training. And so it just warms my heart to see people are putting their lives and their resources and their energy into making a place where people can feel peace and connection, they can congregate. So I'm just deeply appreciative for everyone making that happen here. I'm sure there are a couple people who are particularly responsible, but I'll just say everybody. And just seeing all your faces here, knowing that you come together. The Dharma only happens because people come together to embody the Dharma. That's what it is. It's not somewhere else. So I'm just really appreciative that I get to be included in your vibe here. So I'm going to be focusing my remarks this evening on Vasubandhu's Three Natures, which is the title of this book that I wrote, Vasubandhu's Three Natures. I'm aware that the title may be sort of daunting. Sometimes I'll call the talk Imagination, Interdependence, and Liberation, which is really the theme of the talk. So I know that sometimes this is like an introductory evening. There may be some material I talk about that will seem kind of baffling or might feel like over your head. I just invite you to let that go. And then hopefully I'll come around to something that will, can touch your heart and be part of your life and practice. So it's nice as we come together to have some time to just settle into the body and into the breath. So I'm gonna, I think this evening the plan, since I've come quite a ways, we're gonna go a little bit longer than usual. I'll probably go till about 8:15. If you have to leave, that's okay. But we'll start with about a 10-minute meditation practice. So I'm going to just invite you to find whatever posture that you find good for meditation. Hopefully something where there's a sense of stability. So ability to find some uprightness in the body, some energy, and relaxation. If you're not accustomed to meditation, I'm not going to give a lot of instruction, so you can just enjoy being alive. It's pretty good to get to be alive, I think. So, just letting the gaze rest a little bit down, or letting the eyes closed if you prefer that. And letting your attention begin to settle on the sensations of breathing in the lower abdomen. If you find you're unaware of the breathing, it's not a problem. You can just notice the breathing now. You don't need to get rid of anything or fix anything or judge anything. Just demonstrate that you care about your own body by bringing attention there to the breath. So I'm going to ring a bell. We just sit quietly for a few minutes, manifesting the natural, caring, compassionate quality of awareness by attending to our own embodied experience. All right. Well, I invite you to just readjust your posture, have a wiggle or a stretch if that's what the body needs. How beautiful to be in a space where all these bodies just putting down words and seeing what's happening. The words are quite wonderful. I must believe that because I'm about to talk for about 40 minutes. But no words is really sweet. And it's a surprisingly deep way to make connections with people. I have friends who my main connection with them has come from being on retreat with them. The only time I see them is on retreat. We never talk to each other. We're bound by a deep love and affection. So, nice to be quiet with you. All right, well, I'm going to jump into the material of this talk. So, Vasubandhu's three natures. I'm guessing most of you don't know what either of those things refer to, so I'm going to try and build up the story here for you. Vasubandhu was a 4th or 5th century Indian monk and an enormously influential figure on Buddhism throughout Tibet and East Asia. So at the time in India, he was really influential as well. And Vasubandhu is in all Zen lineages. So Zen traditions trace an unbroken lineage of teachers back 2,500 years. And he is in all Zen lineages. He's considered one of the 6 ornaments of Tibetan Buddhism and one of the 5 great ancestors of the Jodo Shinshu tradition in Japan. Many different traditions find ways to honor him and point out his importance in the formation of Buddhist thought. So a lot of things that I'll be talking about, they might sound different or they might sound unfamiliar, but a lot of the ideas that people think of as just being Buddhist are actually ideas that Vasubandhu was instrumental in creating, innovating, and bringing into Buddhist thought. So Vasubandhu is associated with various Buddhist movements, but one, and the one I'll emphasize, is called Yogacara, which just means yoga practice. And this is a tradition that's about integrating early Buddhist psychology with the Mahāyāna Buddhist emphasis on collective and universal liberation. So early Buddhism tends to emphasize kind of investigating the contents of our experience so the individual can attain nirvana. And Mahāyāna Buddhism is about getting all beings into a boat on the way to liberation and getting everyone free. Both are great. Yogacara says both these methodologies are more powerful if they're integrated than, as in some Buddhist schools, they're kind of separated and one is not used or emphasized. So that's a general idea about Yogacara. One of the reasons I teach Yogacara, probably the main reason I do, is it forms the philosophical basis for Thich Nhat Hanh's approach to Buddhism and for his formation of a model of engaged Buddhism for the 20th and 21st century. So I don't know if you're familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh, but he's an enormously influential Buddhist figure from Vietnam. And his books just basically brought me through the door to Buddhism about 20, 25 years ago, and still deeply inspire me. And I'm in relationship to many people within his tradition. And so he uses Yogacara. He was deeply knowledgeable about the history and traditions of Buddhism. And looking back at all that, when he thought, what could I do to create a movement that's about people engaging in social transformation while taking care of themselves? And he found that Yogacara showed the most powerful model for integrating these modalities. And so this is really, to me, what I'm doing is I've been inspired by him, and I want to carry forward Thich Nhat Hanh's work in this field. So that's a general idea. Another way to think about it is, if you would like to engage in helping people but not be horribly burned out, Yogacara is pretty good. That's another way to kind of put the whole thing together. So the three natures, which is what I'll be focusing on today, is one of the main, kind of the two biggest teachings from Yogacara. The other one that's very well known is called the idea of the storehouse consciousness, or the Alaya Vijnana, which I won't be talking about today. But the three natures, they're pretty philosophical, so get ready. They form basically a philosophical basis for how to look at the world and how to practice looking at the world so that it transforms the way we act in the world and the way we feel. So that's the underpinning here. So the three natures aren't so much a set of practices as like a way of explaining why practice is powerful, why liberation is possible, and why you don't have to wait for liberation, because liberation is always immediately available in any moment for any sentient being. No problem, right? Okay, so the three natures are said to be, well, let me say this. The idea of the three natures teachings is it's useful to see anything as having three natures. Or you could say each thing is of three natures, or you might say all things that have these three characteristics. So characteristics is another term for the natures in this case. So like everything, anything you hear, you see, you think, you feel, you sense with the body, you taste, you touch, all of it can be seen as having these three natures. So the three natures are the imaginary, the dependent, and the complete realized natures. The imaginary nature, the dependent nature, and the complete realized nature. So the imaginary nature of things is what you think they are. The dependent nature of things is that they appear dependent on other things. And the complete realized nature is that they are not what you think they are. Done. So if you don't think that's incredibly challenging and weird, I may have to talk about it some more. I mean, this is a very, very radically challenging teaching. Anything you think is a thing is of imaginary nature and isn't what you think it is. Its complete realized nature is that it's not what you think it is. It is dependent on other things. So to unpack this will take some time. The implications of this teaching are often the opposite of what people think. I want to say clearly, this does not mean that you get to make up reality for yourself. It doesn't mean that. It also doesn't mean anything like what you believe and perceive doesn't matter. So what we'll find is, paradoxically, this teaching uses the idea that what we think things are is as imaginary as a way to point out why they matter to us, and more importantly, why we can do something to engage in transformation. So this is something that when we're talking about these kind of teachings, is really important to continually return to. Because, if you say, oh, that's all in your head. My wife says, are you telling me it's all in my head? I say, no, this says your head is imaginary. Okay, so, but what I'm saying here is, what I'll try and demonstrate here is, the point is that we are all always involved in collectively imagining the world we will live in. And we are all always contributing to whether there will be wellness or suffering. And so this is about empowerment. So I'll get to kind of clarifying why that is true in a minute, but I just want to read a passage from the introduction from this book. This book is I know you're all Buddhist studies scholars, so you're really interested. This is a new translation of Vasubandhu's Treatise on Three Natures, which is 38 short verses, which just kind of talk about the characteristics of the three natures and their relationship and their impact on our experience. And the translation I did with a translation partner named Wei Jian Tang, who's a professor at Dharma University in Taiwan. And then the main body of the book is one chapter of commentary for each verse, which I have written. Okay, so I'm going to read just a little section from the introduction to kind of give us a general sense of these. Every aspect of what we would conventionally call experience is of these three natures: sights, sounds, smells, tastes, physical sensations, thoughts, emotions, and our sense of being a self all have three natures. For example, the cobalt blue car that I can see outside my window is of an imaginary nature. Whatever I'm experiencing it to be right now, a memory, as I'm currently looking at letters on the screen, or now, as I turn my head to look at it again, whatever I think it to be is a construction of habits of consciousness and imagination. I suspect it will take some time for you to consider this a reasonable or useful claim. And so, dear reader, that's why I'm writing this book. That car is also of dependent nature. Countless conditions that are not the car create the appearance of a car. For example, reflected sunlight, ocular nerves, supply chain software, oil refineries, the desire for wealth, and so on. This car is also of complete realized nature. It isn't what I think it is. Recognizing that things aren't what you think they are can radically disarm the paths of your mind that cause you to suffer and cause suffering. For example, in order to see the car in my normal way, I am usually ignorant of or ignore a vast array of conditions on which the appearance of the car depends. Conditions that cause suffering in this time of climate crisis. These teachings are to help us move beyond this kind of ignorance. The so-called knowledge that white people are inherently superior to black people, and the purported fact that race exists as a biological phenomenon, were confirmed by 19th century scientific experiments, which have since been disproven. This caused and causes incalculable harm. This so-called knowledge is imaginary. It arises from conditions, and its complete realized nature is that it is not real. And yet millions of people thought and still think it is true. Although many of us do not, the impacts of the view are pervasive. It affects where people live, the jobs we have, the wealth we inherit, our access to education, and so much more. They are alive in how I experience the world. This teaching is here so we may continually grow in our capacity to end and transform harmful patterns of which we are often unaware. By learning to see the three natures of the ideas that maintain harmful systems, we open the way for liberation. The three natures can be misapplied and easily misunderstood. Understanding the imaginary nature invites humility, not grandiosity. It affirms agency. It does not deny experiences. Understanding the dependent nature affirms kinship with all things. It does not deny differences or boundaries. Understanding the complete realized nature brings faith, compassion, and joy. It does not deny suffering. The three natures provide medicine for our ongoing daily sufferings, no matter how small. So in teaching this material, the biggest challenge is to keep working with this idea that the fact that things are imaginary doesn't mean they don't matter. For example, with the car, even though my view of the car is limited and so not complete and hence imaginary, the impacts of the car are vast, beyond knowing, right? Likewise, with race, which is clearly not a real thing, it was invented about 400 years ago as a human construct, it has enormous impacts. And actually, in a lot of anti-racism work that people do now, the first thing you do is you talk about how race is not a real thing, you demonstrate how it was made and why it was made, and then you say, now that we know it isn't real, we're going to work with how to transform it so it doesn't keep harming people. This is almost identical to the methodology suggested by the three natures with all phenomena. So, I'm going to proceed to talking about each of the natures in turn. The implications of these natures are really vast. So, I can talk about this. I will talk about this for days at a time when I'm leading retreats and stuff. So, but I just kind of give us glimpses into the kind of the key themes. So the imaginary nature of things is what we think they are. The basic idea is that we see things through the limited conditioned lens that we have. And that limited conditioned lens makes an image of things which appear to be objects that are separate from ourselves, which is not an absolute truth. Within this flux of a moment, the tendency of mind to say, this part is me and that's you, it's just a habit of mind. It's not an absolutely real thing. And every other division that makes the world look like it's made up of parts is also just the way our mind is conditioned to make the world look. And this is all based from Buddhist thought on the basic idea that we're trying to go, that's out there. How can I get what I want, figure out what I want, and get more of it? And how can I see what I don't want and get rid of it? And then we have desire and aversion. So the basic delusion is all this divisive thinking that we have, and it produces desire and aversion, and hence we have a cycle of suffering. So that's all produced by the way we imagine the world, or the way we experience and perceive the world. So the basic idea here within Yogacara thought is that the way we imagine the world is produced by a system or a pattern. So any action of thought, emotion, or any action with the body, including speech, so you might have heard this expressed as body, speech, and mind. Any action of body, speech, and mind plants a seed that will produce a similar fruit at a later date. So, for example, if you practice playing a scale on a piano, it makes it a little likely that that will happen again. And if you do it like 500 times, suddenly it's just like, that wasn't a very good scale. Anyway, that was like a very out of tune piano. Anyway, so this theory explains very simple things of how we can build habits and develop skills. But it also, more fundamentally, from a Buddhist perspective, since the whole purpose of this enterprise is to alleviate suffering, it points out how suffering is constructed. So you might say every time you see a particular person, you're like, that person is a jerk. I don't like them. They're wrong. And blah. So that plants seeds of alienation, of separation, of judgment. There's probably emotions like anger or irritation. So in that moment of having those kind of thoughts, all those seeds are planted, and they're likely to produce similar seeds. You probably have some people like that in your life. You have these patterns of perceiving a person a certain way, or there may be someone you really love, and you see them and you go, I want to just give my attention to them and hear how they're doing and try and be supportive, and it plants seeds of connection and care and compassion. So if you haven't picked up on this, what I'm talking about is karma. So basically within this Yogacara idea, karma produces our moment of imagination. That is to say, our moment of experience. So there's huge, unknowable amounts of conditioning producing any given moment. Because like the fact that you can even understand what I'm saying is mind-boggling. Like how many seeds had to be planted of you listening to sounds and being like, those are human sounds, cool. And then you're like, oh, they're kind of like have a pattern. And then you're like, when a P sound happens, it's a P. And if you go a turn, you have meaning. Just to be interpreting this sentence is the fruit of millions of seeds that were planted, not just in your lifetime, but in thousands of lifetimes. That's just a tiny example from this moment. Every element of this momentary experience could be subject to this analysis. So in Yogacara, we say the seeds that produce our experience are like a waterfall, a torrent. So, wow. One of the implications is like, wow, look around. Isn't it easy to go through your life like, oh, I don't want everything is. I'd rather be like, what is going on? It's more interesting. But more importantly here, the implications, two important implications is one, no matter what, you are always, in every other sentient being in any given moment, planting seeds that will produce what will be experienced. Always. Your life is not trivial. No moment of your life is trivial. This is why in Zen temples, we have little gathas, little verses you say when you brush your teeth. May I clean, purify the world for all beings while I clean my teeth. May I, when I'm shaving, may I cut off my vanity. When you use the toilet, may I eliminate all defilements. Each activity reminding us that this is an opportunity to manifest the vow that all beings be free from suffering. You can bring this into your life. You don't have to live in a monastery. You can start to be like, I'm always planting seeds. No moment is trivial. When you're in the car, it's not like you're waiting to get somewhere else. You're like manifesting reality. How cool is that? How are you going to do it? Would you like to manifest reality by yelling at people or being really annoyed? Or would you like to be like, I'm really annoyed. Maybe I should bring some compassion to this difficult feeling of frustration. Any moment where you're suffering is an opportunity to realize compassion is immediately available just by noticing how you feel. You can plant seeds of compassion anytime. So another important implication of this is that everyone comes to the moment with a bunch of conditioning, and that matters. So we're not all the same. And what we need in order to practice for liberation is not all the same. It's not the same medicine for everyone. People believe different things. And when they believe different things, it doesn't mean I'm right and you're wrong. I could be like, I'm imagining it like this. You're imagining like that. I want everyone to be free. What am I going to do? That's a radically different position than I know the absolute truth, which I read in a book or read in the newspaper, and you're either with it or wrong. So this opens up into realizing that liberation in the practice, moment to moment of being with helicopters or people, is always relational, always and only relational. There's not an absolute truth out there that people either have or don't have. You may not like that idea, but I found it's really beautiful because then you can always meet people where they're at, including yourself. Okay, So I want to talk a little bit about the dependent nature. The idea that all things arise dependent on conditions runs through all Buddhist teachings. But there are different emphasis in different Buddhist schools. But the one thing that we'll say in Yogacara, it's useful to conceptualize interdependence. So that means just think about how something depends on other things. So I thought of this one the other day when you go to the store and you buy some broccoli, and you get the broccoli and you're like, now it's my broccoli. Now you can conceptualize all that came to be so that broccoli can be there. I mean, it's a lot. There's like worms involved and truck drivers and sun. I thought it'd be more interesting to think, what had to happen for me to believe I can own things? That's weird. That's a weird thing. I mean, I believe I can own things. I'll be grumpy if you take my broccoli. Probably. It's never happened. Broccoli theft is not common, but so you can just pause. How? So thinking, just listening, things that come to be. This is why in many Buddhist traditions, before you eat, we say we reflect on the effort that brought us this food. Or we'll say innumerable labors brought us this food. Realizing how much happens just so we can have this moment of nourishment. So that's cool. And that's a great way to sort of begin to access the dependent nature. I'll also say, feeling the dependent nature is often a natural result of practicing simple meditation. So oftentimes when people do some very simple meditation practices that just ground awareness in the moment, they'll just notice what's around them more and feel less alienated from it. You know what I mean? That difference? You're like, yesterday I walked down the street and I was just like churning through my thoughts, blah, blah, blah. I didn't even notice anything. And then the next day you get up, you do meditation, you walk down the street, you see people. You're like, oh, a bird. Kind of like a 2-year-old. It's cool. You feel more close to reality. It's a feeling. Or, you practice meditation and a few weeks later you realize, your partner comes to you or someone in your family comes to you and you realize, oh, I have an urge to pick up my phone, but right now I just want to listen to you. And you realize that connection, that tendency to connect is natural. So dependent nature is really about recognizing connection, which is already here. But you will find if you commit to practice it just happens. And you can name it. It's like, oh, I feel a little more close to what's going on right now. So that can feel really good. It's very common for that to feel really good to people. It is important to note, though, that seeing the dependent nature also can be very painful. Because when we really recognize the dependent nature, we're moving close to the first noble truth of suffering, which is to realize that there's no suffering anywhere that we can be ultimately separate from. It doesn't mean we have to feel all the suffering in the world in our own heart or something, but it does mean we realize we're not separate from any of it. And this can be painful, You open up to people more. Joanna Macy is like a pioneer of integrating Buddhist practice with ecology and working against climate change. And she starts by saying, we just have to let the grief in that comes when you really acknowledge how horrifying what is happening to the planet is. People will not get motivated to change unless they actually move and touch that truth. It's not like we're trying to make people suffer. The thing is, the dependent nature, we're saying if you see things as dependent, you're getting closer to seeing the truth. That will be closer to getting free. That will be closer to liberation from suffering, but it may be painful in the moment as we acknowledge it. This is also true, if you're a guy and your spouse comes up and goes, hey, did you know you're just kind of reproducing patriarchy in our household and I'd like you to do the laundry? Doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel good. But then you can be like, guess what? It's painful to get close to that truth, to realize that I'm a part of a system that has harmed billions of people since almost the dawn of human civilization. And then guess what? It's of imaginary nature, so you can do something about it. That's the beautiful thing. You can let in the truth that you're close to these systems that harm people. Touch the pain if it arises, and then realize, I can't fix it. I can't control it. I'm not, I didn't create it, but I can do something that will help. That feels good to people, to realize you can do something that will help. How many people in this room, you don't have to raise your hands, have read the news in the last few weeks and had a moment of just like, what the heck can I do? It's too big. Buddhism is never an invitation to think you can't offer something. It's always a reminder that you have agency, you have liberative capacity. There's suffering in the world, and you could do something about it. That's the first message of the Buddha. So I want to read a little passage from this book about the dependent nature. What we'll see here is that these three natures are all distinct. And then also Vasubandhu is like, here's all their distinct characteristics. And by the way, they're identical and non-dual. So I don't know how much you like Buddhism, but this is the kind of stuff I get into. Anyway, so you might be like, this sounds a lot like the way the imaginary works. Yeah. So they're both different and identical. Anyway, I'll read this passage. It may be useful to note before I start that I am a recovering addict and alcoholic. Anyway, we don't passively receive the reality of the world through our senses and then respond to it. The world we experience is created. It is, in quotes from the text, the active cognition of seer and seen. Our life is created by our karma, and we create karma in every moment. We have the power to plant seeds that will create a better world. This body of teaching emphasizes the impact of each moment of intentionality. Our power lies in the quality of heart and mind we offer to the moment. Why do I think this worldview is more effective than materialism for healing our suffering and freeing us from collective modes of violence, oppression, and destruction? I will answer with some lines from a Chinese Chan nun named Baoqi, who wrote, "The vastness of karmic consciousness is hard to prove, but when Mr. Zhang drinks, then Mr. Li gets drunk." Sometimes I get a call or I see an obituary telling me that another friend of mine has died from addiction. I've lost a dozen friends so far, and I can never know what part my enabling of their intoxication played or the impact their deaths and addictions will have on future generations of their families. The web is too complex to map with materialist tools. I can never know the impact of the thousands of hours I've spent working with addicts in recovery either. I have witnessed the awakening of so much freedom. One of Baoqi's inspirations, the great Chan nun Miaozong, wrote, "When outside the diamond door he glowered, inside the stable the wooden horse's face turned red." In the verse above, there is no physical connection between the man's glower and the wooden horse's face, and yet there is reaction and connection. We cannot ultimately know when or where the results of any karmic seed will manifest, but manifest they will. Miaozong wrote her lines in a Chan compilation she created in the 12th century. But could she have known that in the 17th century, Baoqi and her Dharma sister Zukui, looking to revive the rarely recorded teachings of a female master of Chan, would pull them from obscurity and write their own commentaries? Or that Beata Grant in the 21st century would again revive them in English? I believe that buying a chunk of an animal killed thousands of miles away, or offering a caring smile for a person on the street, as well as each tiny moment of anxiety, desire, or compassion you cultivate, has an impact on every living thing. I can't measure it. Miao says the wooden horse's face turns red. A wooden horse is a classic Buddhist metaphor for something that has no reality or causal agency, like the horns of a rabbit, a wooden man, or a stone woman. Miao invites us into a worldview of mystery where we don't know or see what is ultimately real, but where an angry glare causes suffering we can't calculate, where a smile has radiance beyond the limits of our knowing, where our actions really matter. All of this isn't real, but it's as real as it gets. So, real as it gets. Everything is of imaginary nature, dependent nature, and complete realized nature. And I have arrived at the good news, my friends. This place feels like a church. I can teach the good news of Buddhism. Complete realized nature. So if you remember, the complete realized nature is that what you think things are is not what they are. But the complete realized nature is complete, whole, and real. And it's here. Whatever you're perceiving is of complete realized nature, according to this teaching. So from the Buddhist perspective, what makes a Buddha is a few things. You could make a long list or a short list, but basically you could say what makes a Buddha is they do not suffer, they do not cause suffering, and they see what is real. And it's in fact seeing what is real that enables them to not suffer or cause suffering. But when they're seeing what is real, they're not seeing some other place than you are. Because the literature we have is of Buddhas hanging out with people. Just in the same place. In the Solid Grove, in the Jeddah Park, walking on the road, eating breakfast, saying I'm eating breakfast, it's not time to talk. Anyway, so complete and real is here. Is here. So this is why this is clearly a Mahāyāna teaching. It is central to all Mahāyāna Buddhist schools to say that samsara and nirvana are inseparable. They're inseparable. You don't have to wait for liberation. You don't have to wait for anything. This is complete. And you might think, that sounds nice for you, pal, but I'm having an awful day. I barely heard anything you said because I'm so anxious. My heart goes to you. That's real. That matters. That matters. But it's also true that it's just how you're perceiving things. That's also true. One way to think of this is that we have suffering because our mind has divided things up into self and other and objects which can be either gotten or gotten rid of. And none of those things are true. It's not ultimately and absolutely self and other. And none of the things we are objects are absolutely objects. I'm not saying they don't seem that way or it doesn't matter, like it's good to eat oatmeal instead of gravel. It's true. But at the same time, seeing the world from the limited lens of how things are useful to us binds us to our own patterns of suffering. And it's based on things that are not absolute truths. The absolute truth is that they're not absolute truths. It's that simple. So, in talking about this, it is frequently used in Buddhist literature. In talking about the complete realized nature, we talk about the complete realized nature of what would conventionally be considered the self, and the complete realized nature of what would be conventionally understood to be other. I'm couching my language here, because they're not really self and other. They're not absolutely. So at the end of Vasubandhu's 30 verses on consciousness only, the last verse says, this is the inconceivable, wholesome, unstained, constant realm, the blissful body of liberation, the Dharma body of the great sage. The text is intended to be chanted so that I would not be the one gesturing at the world and saying how awesome it is, and the body saying it's Buddha. You would, because it's true. The text says that when you see the complete realized nature, when you recognize it, you see that you're in the Dharma realm, and you see this is the body of the Buddha. But it also says that it's already true, because all those things that you think are objects that impinge on your well-being are not. I know that's kind of freaky, But guess what? Buddhism is a religion. We rely on faith. Some of us do. This teaching encourages us to rely on some faith. So this is the inconceivable, wholesome, unstained, constant realm, the blissful body of liberation, the Dharma body of the great sage. Hakuin Zenji, at the end of the Song of Zazen, paraphrases Vasubandhu when he says it a little simpler. This very place is the lotus land, this very body the Buddha. By the way, this is a text that's telling you why you should meditate. Because this is the lotus land and this is the Buddha. Dogen Zenji, who founded the Soto school, of which I'm a lineage holder, in his text that explains how and why to do meditation, begins this way. The way is originally perfect and all-pervading. How could it be contingent on practice and realization? The true vehicle is self-sufficient. What is there need for some special effort? The whole body is free from dust. Who could believe in a means to brush it clean? It is never apart from this very place. What is the use of traveling around to practice? It's the same thing over and over again. A reminder that liberation is not later and you're not broken. We'll just say again, this doesn't mean that your suffering doesn't matter or isn't real. All these truths live together. We can find a way to live together with this paradox. I'm going to read you two short passages in the book related to this material I'm talking about now with the complete realized nature, and then I'm going to see if other people want to say things. So the first one is related to the complete realized nature of what we would conventionally consider to be the self. It's from a chapter called Already Buddha. When I came to Buddhist practice, I was seeking something else. I sought an escape from the anguish I experienced. My therapist told me it was the anguish of trauma from the past reproducing itself. My psychiatrist told me my brain didn't process serotonin properly. My addiction recovery friends called it defects of character, self-will, run riot. My Buddhist studies called it afflictive karma. All these ways of looking at it have their utility, and I am deeply grateful for all who have supported me in finding the wondrous, joyful existence of today. When we suffer, when we see the suffering of others, it is right to seek wellness, to seek something else. However, it is also true that there is not something else, that you and I are not and cannot be broken. For if there is brokenness, there must be a wholeness that is elsewhere. This is a duality, and duality is just a habit of mind. And now, on the complete realized nature of where we are, recently I heard a talk by a Dakota elder named Bob Clanderud. He spoke of the total kinship of all life. He told us that the confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers near my home on U.S.-occupied Dakota land is called Bedote. For the Dakota, Bedote is the origin of the universe, the land of Genesis. In his words, it is Eden. He asked us, now that you know you live in Eden, how will you choose to live? Well, thank you, Bob Clanderud, and thank you all for your kind attention to my speaking. I love to hear other people's voices. So we have a lot of people here. So I'm just going to suggest that whatever you say, keep it terse so that there's room for many voices, hopefully. And I welcome questions of any kind. So it can be like, some people are really into Buddhist studies, and they're like, I would like to hear more about the relationship between the dependent nature and karma in early Buddhist systems versus Mahāyāna. Oh, that's fun. Or you could just be like, man, every time I go to work, I want to punch the wall. How does this help? So, really, wherever you're at, just, what's in your heart is welcome. Yes, please.
I would love to hear the second quote from your book, second to the end quote again. It felt really profound and super relevant for something I personally am going through, and it really touched me. I actually brought like a tear to my eye, and I would love to just hear it again from different ears.
So the little reading?
Yeah, like the actual reading of the quote from your book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll read it again.
Thank you.
That would be nice. I like reading. Everyone likes reading, right? I'm teasing somebody. Okay. Let me find my page. When I came to Buddhist practice, I was seeking something else. I sought an escape from the anguish I experienced. My therapist told me it was the anguish of trauma from the past reproducing itself. My psychiatrist told me my brain didn't process serotonin properly. My addiction recovery friends called it defects of character, self-will run riot. My Buddhist studies called it afflictive karma. All these ways of looking at it have their utility, and I am deeply grateful for all who have supported me in finding the wondrous, joyful existence of today. When we suffer, when we see the suffering of others, it is right to seek wellness, to seek something else. However, it is also true that there is not something else, that you and I are not and cannot be broken. For if there is brokenness, there must be a wholeness that is elsewhere. This is a duality, and duality is just a habit of mind. Thank you. Other folks? Yeah, go ahead.
Is perception an inherently flawed system?
Ooh, is perception an inherently flawed system? According to this, the way we perceive the world creates suffering. So I don't know if you call that flawed or not. Also, it's related to the idea of klesha in Buddhism, which actually one of the translations of the term klesha is flaw, like a flaw in a jewel. So you could say so. But if the question is, do we perceive absolute reality through our senses? This teaching says definitely yes, as long as we realize that whatever we think it is isn't what it is. But as long as we believe the dualities and the separations we're perceiving, then we're perceiving it in a way that will produce suffering. But also within which we can use discernment and do something beneficial. Thank you. Yeah.
I know a few people that came with tonight. There's probably some others that may not be quite as well versed with meditation. There may be a couple of things that you might be able to suggest to make the art of the meditation more bountiful for those who may not be experienced.
Yeah, great question. Meditation is, to my mind, Buddhist practice is doing beneficial things. And there's lots of ways to do that. But meditation is a really good one. So I say, make that part of your practice. You could be nice to people. You can cook food for people. You can give money to people. You can be kind to yourself. But yes, meditation will transform how you do all those things. And, a great thing to do is find your real motivation for doing it, so that we're meditating because we want people to be free from suffering, not to fix ourselves because we're broken. Find a community that will help you to feel that you're doing something collectively. So one, meditation, doing it with other people is of great value. And we have a culture that's kind of giving people the messages like, oh, meditation, you just get the app and then you just do it and, you'll feel a little bit better. That's cool. I want people to feel better. but the Buddhist tradition emphasizes, at least part of the time, doing meditation as a collective activity where we're feeling other bodies in that stillness. So you're probably like, couldn't you tell me what to do with my mind? But actually, the way my training is, it's about putting your body into the room with the other bodies in the shape of a Buddha, and then letting the body teach the mind how to have the stillness that it has. But having said that, if we practice really simple modes of meditation, just noticing the breath, trying to make that an act of demonstrating care. So to tie that to what I'm teaching about today, realizing that it's not just like, well, I'm trying to see if I know if I'm breathing or not, or if I pay attention to my breath, then I'll have a concentrated mind. We want to be like, I care about this body because it is here. So bringing that energy to it will be really helpful. And then it's like what you've done then is you planted seeds of care, and you planted seeds of here-ness. And those two, like if here-ness and care begin to permeate how you meet the moment, there will never be a time that doesn't help. So there's a couple thoughts. Thank you. Yeah, in the back.
I'm a nurse in an ER, and I get a lot of alcoholic and addicts, and I try to give them love and compassion, but it's also with I think it comes with judgment sometimes, or I'm trying to tell them, this is your journey, this is your road, you can continue down this road, or you can get free of this. It is your choice. Nobody gets to make that for you. And I try to be loving and kind, but I don't always think it comes out like that. And I think, like Mother Teresa, who saw the very, very sick in India, and all she did, she didn't judge them or anything. She just washed their feet. How do I try to help them? I don't know, help them with more love and compassion. I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, great question. So one of the first things I like to think about this when you're talking about a fraught relationship, and I'll just say, I'm talking about what you're talking about also, but like maybe other people don't have this. Maybe it's someone you're really mad at, and you're like, how can I be nice to them? And in both cases, the first thing, in my opinion, is to turn and notice how you feel. So planting seeds of caring about whatever emotion is present in you is very powerful. So people say, how can I be compassionate towards them? And it's like, well, what's going on here? There's some sense of brokenness or wrongness or pain in you. Start there, or at least make sure that's part of the picture. Because that just needs care. It's hard to be around people who are suffering a lot. And it's hard to be around people who do things that upset you. So starting there really helps. The other thing is, we can't try to remember you can't control anything. So a simple takeaway from this talk I'm giving you, basic idea from the three natures is your actions have infinite impact and you can't control anything. Really. Because the quality of your intention goes into the karmic system that produces a world, but the apparent objects that you think you can control aren't actually objects. And I can maybe explicate that more, but I'm not going to. Pretty simple. If you just kind of, what I do always matters, but I can't control people. That starts to disarm it a little bit, because I've worked with addiction recovery a lot, and it's very painful to see. I worked with someone for 2 years, and then they die. It's hard. It's painful. But I can realize I'm not in control. I did my best, or I tried to do my best. I don't even know if I did my best. I'm trying. I do want to say a personal story to you. One of the last times I was in detox, a nurse came up to me, and I don't know why she picked me out. I remember how I felt about her. I did not like it. She sat down next to me and she's like, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about your life? And I was like, God, I hate you. I mean, like, it's still, the memory of it raises the rage in my body. And now I'm so grateful that she just took a minute to care. So we don't know. We don't know. We don't understand. And Was she trying to be controlling? I can never know that. But so there's something about sort of not knowing, taking care of your emotions, doing your best to discern and taking action. So thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
So if you have no control, then you don't have control over your body and your mind and your emotions. Is it like trying to let these things flow in a more natural, freer way?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so it gets to be kind of like it gets to be pretty confusing. You're like, I don't have control over my body because I'm pretty sure I just lifted up my hand, right? It's like, what's going on here? The basic idea, one, there's a lot of things we can't control about my body. Like, I would love to be ripped right now. Sounds funny, but actually the second teaching of the Buddha is where he specifically says the way you know what I'm talking about with non-self is you can't just make your body what you want. That's actually one of the first things he ever taught. So there are certainly obvious ways in which we don't have control. To say we're just trying to do flow, maybe, insofar as if it seems like kind of flowing with what is beneficial. But we are invited to be discerning, right? So it's kind of like in this moment, there's like, oh, there's a set of bodily sensations here. I can feel this, whatever. It seems to be a body that's mine. And then there's a visual field, sounds, there's stuff in my mind. Can I notice all that happening and then go, given that it seems like this to me right now, what would it be beneficial to offer? And that changes the flavor of how we relate to the moment. But if you want to get into the philosophy, the question of like, do you have control of your body? There's a bunch of neuroscientists to be like, no, free will is an illusion. Basically, this teaching says there's a paradox. From one perspective, we don't have free will. From another, we don't. But from the Buddhist perspective, we will never deny free will because the whole point of the tradition, from the basis, is to tell people they have liberative agency. So even though that paradox lives there, we fall back into what's your offering. But you may find your wheels turning for 50 more years on that one. Mine still are. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, we've arrived at total completeness, just like every other moment. And maybe you have just some suffering in your heart. I'm so grateful that we're able to be together and hopefully manifest some care for each other. So thank you for making this beautiful community and letting me be a part of it for a few minutes. So thank you all very much.